All right, here we go. Well, good morning, everyone. An extra special good morning to anyone who is getting up at 5 a.m., 4 a.m., 3 a.m., or maybe 2 a.m. to join. Oh, yes, okay. Welcome, everyone, to the official Golem 1.0 Hackathon. So this hackathon here is designed to coincide almost with the launch of Golem 1.0. We're actually sort of celebrating the launch, and now this is the first hackathon where you can use the official version of Golem that is ready for production and has the full set of features necessary to go live. So very excited to see what folks end up building in this hackathon. And this morning, I'm going to walk you through some of the requirements that we are imposing on hackathon solutions, talk a bit more about the prizes, discuss the schedule, and then answer any questions that you might have at the end. So, first thing is first, though, if you haven't already done so, then definitely please join us on our Discord, our official Discord. So I don't have a way to post that here, but if you go to that bit.ly link up here, you should be able to sign up for this event. Oh, there. Okay, fantastic. So Christina just posted a link to the Discord. So if you're not already on there, be on there because everyone else will be on there. And that's where you're going to get sort of one-on-one support from Golem open source contributors. That's where you can have your questions answered. That's where you can coordinate with other contributors. So in this hackathon, you can do everything by yourself, or you can join a team and you can work with a few other people. And that's up to you. But if you didn't bring your own team for this hackathon, then that Discord is the place where you're going to find one. All right, let me open up my notes here 1 second. All righty, so this hackathon, in order to be fair, we had to hold a little secret, which is what sort of applications are we going to be considering for those hackathon entries that are competing for the prizes? And what I ended up deciding on is building a Twitter clone. So that's the official target for everyone competing in this hackathon. Your job is to build a Twitter clone on top of Golem. Now, when I say Twitter clone, I don't mean a clone of all of Twitter. Rather, I mean actually a bit of Twitter's backend. And we'll talk about what that is. But in order to build this bit of Twitter's backend in a way that's horizontally scalable in the number of users, you have to solve some pretty interesting challenges. And therefore, that makes this a problem in distributed systems engineering. If you want scalability, if you want everyone to be able to access whatever posts they want, if you want some users who are sort of subscribing to posts of other users and whatnot, as well as the ability to browse, then you have a lot of challenges in distributed systems engineering. And Golem is designed, among other things, to provide a very simple, elegant, powerful way to solve virtually any challenge in distributed systems engineering. And it does that, of course, by offering this combination of very broad horizontal scalability as well as automatic durability. The code that you write, it will run sort of invincibly to completion. And all the state information that you hold in memory is actually durable, is actually persistent. So that means you can use memory as a database. And in fact, that's the natural thing to do with Golem is use memory as a database. You don't necessarily need another database. So I think a problem like this is going to open up the doors to one of two paths, and it's going to be up to you which one you choose. But there's a reason for choosing one of those paths that I'll talk about soon. And in one of those paths, you build Twitter on Golem with other third-party services like S3, for example, blob storage, maybe DynamoDB, other sort of classic big data uh, stores and databases. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that approach. It's more classic architecture. The other approach is to say, well, how would we build Twitter if we had access to Golem? How would we build it in a way that is unique and specific to Golem's capabilities? Would we need a, a third-party storage mechanism or a third-party database? Or might it be possible to build the entire thing in Golem? Maybe tweets are just in-memory information that exists on workers running in the Golem cluster. So that opens up the door to whole new types of architectures. And not all of those architectures are equally good. So there's probably half a dozen different ways you could think to do a Twitter clone on Golem, maybe more. And I know for a fact some of those are not going to have great scaling properties. So whatever you come up with, it's going to be interesting to take a look at the results and go through the judging. All right, so schedule 5 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That's now, or rather 11 minutes ago. That's when the hackathon starts. And I'm just going to share this information with you now, have a QA session at the end at 6 a.m. or earlier if you like. You don't have to wait for me to get done. You can immediately begin hacking on your project. However, if you would like to coordinate and join a team or form a team, then definitely do that now. So you have the chance to maximize your hacking hours. Then between today and tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, that's 32 hours. You have 32 hours to complete your hackathon project. And obviously, you should be getting some sleep. Don't plan on hacking through the night. That's not a very healthy thing to do. Get some sleep tonight. If you do have a team and that team happens to span international boundaries, maybe you can do 24/7 between all of your team members, but definitely get some sleep. There's no reason to kill yourself over this project. And then at 1 p.m., we will meet back here, actually on a slightly different webinar link. We're all going to meet back here, and we're going to talk about the completion and wrap up of the project. And then at that point, I'll have some specific instructions for what's next. And what's next for those of you who are submitting entries is to prepare a little demo, and I'll talk about the requirements for that tomorrow. And that demo is basically going to give everyone a chance to see what it is you came up with. And if it doesn't work, if it's only halfway there, that's fine. So there's no guarantee anyone actually builds something that's 100% working. Probably everyone will have some drawbacks. In some cases, maybe in all cases, maybe it's not a finished project and you just have a little bit done. That's okay. That's fine. So that shouldn't stop you from doing a demo if you don't want to. So at 2 p.m., we will sort of go one by one through the list of people who have submitted entries and allow each one to present their work in about 5 minutes. So you'll have an opportunity to sort of show what you've done and maybe talk a little bit about your architectural choices and so forth. And then immediately following that, the judges will probably take, I would say, 5 to 10 minutes for deliberations. And after that point, we will immediately go through and announce the winners. So the features that we're requiring for your Twitter clone are as follows. First off, you have to have some sort of concept of a user in your system. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to support authentication and authorization and all these other features. You can if you want, if you're ambitious and have nothing better to do, you're welcome to support those types of features. But at the bare minimum, you need some concept of a user. And this concept of a user is going to be utilized in the APIs that you end up building for your Twitter backend clone. And in particular, these APIs need to include the following features. Number one, one user should be able to follow and unfollow another user. And following and unfollowing is a form of sort of subscribing to updates. So when you follow someone on Twitter/X, then you get their updates. Those are pushed to you or maybe pulled if you're building some sort of lazy architecture. But the idea is if I follow someone, I want to see all the stuff that they're doing. And then number two, you have to support posting new posts, right? Someone comes up with a new post. You don't have to support posting images and videos. So that's not required. Just ordinary text is totally fine. Number three, you have to support a API that would allow a user to browse their timeline, which is a chronological ordering of all the posts of all the users that they're following. So if I'm following 100 different users and I call this timeline API, then I get back basically their merged subscription feeds containing the updates from all of them in chronological order. Number three, browsing. So I should be able to go onto the timeline of, or rather, onto the post page of any particular user, even a user I'm not following, and manually see just their posts in chronological order. So this is just me checking out a user. I don't know if I want to follow them yet. So I go over their page and I see what they've been posting, and then I make that decision. And then finally, you need to have some sort of API for updating profile stuff, like the user's name and maybe profile picture, URL, or something like that. Some little API that allows a user to update their own personal details on the Twitter backend. Now, what's not included in this? Well, I already mentioned authentication and authorization. I already mentioned videos and images and sounds. None of that is included. There's no private messaging. And interestingly, there's no requirement for a front end. So the only requirement here is that you build a REST API that does basically those five things. So if you got a nice simple REST API that does all those five things, might have some drawbacks, then congratulations, you're there. We are making some technical requirements on these solutions, and this is what makes it really interesting because there's a lot of ways to do this. And some of those ways are just not going to scale. So you've got to carefully think through what sort of way to chop up this problem will result in the ability to scale this platform over any number of users. Okay, there's a lot of dimensions of scalability that we could be requiring, but we're only requiring one, and that is horizontal scalability in the total number of users. That is not the same as scalability in the total number of posts. You don't even have to contemplate a user with 1 million posts. It's also not scalability in the number of people you're following. The real Twitter allows people to follow millions of people, which of course is kind of absurd because that doesn't mean anything at that point. Whereas for this solution, you don't have to consider scalability in the number of people that you follow. You could consider that to be a small number. And then number two, we are requiring that you implement worker-to-worker communication. And what is worker-to-worker communication? Well, worker-to-worker communication occurs when you have one of your running workers representing something in this Twitter clone make an RPC call to another worker. And you could do that through your own HTTP API, but that's not very fun. Golem has built-in support for this feature called worker-to-worker communication that's documented on the website. And it was also demoed by Daniel Vygotsky last Friday on our official 1.0 launch event. So if you're wondering what worker-to-worker is all about and you need technical details on how to do that, then definitely check out the Developer Center or the launch video from last Friday. Number three, the final technical requirement is that you expose a clean and idiomatic REST API for web and mobile clients. And I should say something about that because when you build on Golem, you automatically get APIs out of that. However, those APIs have a particular shape. They allow you to call in to basically spin up your workers and to call functions on them, a process called invocation. And that's all fine for testing and development, but when you're building a real production system, you want control over a public API. You probably want to add features like authentication, authorization, all that fun stuff. And then you also want to make sure that the REST API follows certain conventions that are expected by developers of front-end applications. So we are requiring that you expose this clean and idiomatic REST API. And probably the simplest way to use that is to use Golem's built-in support, which was also demoed last Friday. And that involves having an API definition set up in front of the components that make up your application. And this API definition can have different routes in there, and these different routes can end up creating workers and also invoking them with whatever sort of requirements. So all of this is both demoed last Friday as well as documented in the Developer Center. And then if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask on the Discord, and we will try to help you out. So those are the three technical requirements: horizontal scalability, a number of users, using worker-to-worker communication, and then exposing a clean idiomatic REST API for web and mobile clients. Now, if you don't get all the way there, that's fine. You should still submit your solution because at this point, we don't have any indication that anyone will get there. So definitely do as much as you can. If you had to sacrifice one, then I would say the easiest one to sacrifice will be the worker-to-worker communication, probably, because you can always call into your own API through the sort of untyped REST API that you're building. So you could always implement some features in terms of the very public API if you had to, if you can't figure out worker-to-worker in time. Bonus points. There's three ways to get bonus points. Well, I should say, having a working solution that satisfies all requirements is probably the biggest bonus point. So try to do that. Even though it's not required, do try to do that. But bonus points, if you want to get even more points than having a fully working solution, then develop a simple front end in JavaScript or TypeScript that uses the API. This is where I think teams will be maybe quite effective. If you have a two-person team, someone to help out with the front end or to work on the front end while you work on the back end, or vice versa. Or if you're a full stack engineer and you can stand up a very simple web page that can just show some of this back end functionality, then you'll definitely get bonus points for that. If you support more of Twitter's functionality than the bare minimum that we talked about, that's another way to get bonus points. And then finally, the last way to get bonus points is to have no dependency on any infrastructure except Golem. So delete your database, delete your queues, delete your key value stores, delete everything. Just use Golem. Build this solution 100% on Golem. Take advantage of Golem's durable state. Store all state in memory. It doesn't matter. It's going to be around forever. And it's going to have the same sort of transactional guarantees you would expect out of a database. So why use databases? In order to implement that solution, you're going to have to think long and hard about how you partition state. So a big application like Twitter has terabytes of data compressed or more uncompressed, even more if you include video and audio. And obviously all of that is not going to fit on a single machine or a single worker. A single worker is not going to be able to store that in memory. So you're going to have to think very carefully about how you take what could be a lot of information if there are a lot of users, and how you partition that up into small bits of information, each one of which can be stored in a worker. So that does require you to put your distributed systems engineer hat on and think about all the different ways you have of sharding the state, which is the sort of total collection of all posts together with the relationships between everyone, and then figure out a way to map that to sort of code and in-memory data structures in a way that's horizontally scalable. All right, so we will judge your projects based on the following criteria. They should demonstrate effective use of Golem's capabilities. That means we are really looking for you to understand and take advantage of Golem's unique feature set. Ordinarily, you write code and you run it and it's subject to failure. That's not true with Golem. You write code and you run it on Golem and it can live forever, so you can keep calling into it all different functions that it exports, and then everything that's in memory is also going to be there forever, even if there's infrastructure failures. And that's unique, and we're looking for solutions that really take advantage of that in one way or another. We're also, as I mentioned, going to be judging your architecture based on its horizontal scalability in the number of users. We'll take a look at your code and try to assess code quality and test coverage. So you might not have any tests, and that's fine because this is a hackathon. No need for best practices here. But we will be at least taking a look at that. And if your code is very high quality and it does have unit tests and it appears to be solid, then you'll get extra points for that. Usability as a sort of functional Twitter X clone. So we'll be looking at whether or not we could actually use this REST API that you come up with to build a simple Twitter clone. Does it have all the right stuff to enable us to build a front end for it that actually does work and functions a bit like a Twitter clone? We'll also look at the API design and its implementation. So what sort of REST API did you build for this? Does it make sense? Would it make sense to other developers? And is it implemented efficiently and ideally using Golem itself? There's many ways you could put an API on top of Golem. You could use an API gateway, for example, and that's not disallowed. You're welcome to use something like Kong or Tyke or some third-party API gateway if that's how you want to add an API to your Golem project. That's fine. But you could also use Golem itself. We're going to look at that implementation a bit and just consider its design and the quality of that design in our judging process. And then finally, if you do manage to implement any extra functionality or lightweight front end in JavaScript, TypeScript, then we'll take a look at the quality and the functionality of those extra features as well. And that will be part of the judging process. So obviously it should go without saying that judging is going to be performed entirely by Golem Cloud team members, and that it's at our discretion who to award these prizes to, and we can use any criteria that we want. We're going to try to be very fair and explain our thinking as we go through, but nonetheless, this is our discretion, and there's basically no complaining afterwards. So work hard, but there's no guarantee that any particular team will win. We're going to try to award these based on the best, according to our understanding of that, but it is at our discretion. All right, so submission requirements. By 1 p.m. tomorrow, you should have aimed to publish your code in a public GitHub repository. Okay, we're going to snapshot these things. So publish them by 1 p.m., no later than 1 p.m. tomorrow, Eastern Daylight Time. Publish your code on a public GitHub repository that anyone can check out. Until then, you're welcome to keep it private if you like. So other people aren't copying you, or you can make it public if you don't care. That's fine. Be sure to release your code under MIT or Apache 2 license. So pick one of those, one of your favorite licenses, and release the code under that, just so other people can end up benefiting from your code after the hackathon is complete. And then finally, you don't have to do this by 1 p.m. This is going to happen at 1 p.m. But if you finish early and you have some extra time, then definitely start working on that demo. And you can find some of the requirements. We'll talk about them more tomorrow at 1 p.m., but you can find those requirements in the guide that was sent you this morning. The prizes are as follows. For the first place winner, we will be gifting a prize of 3,000 United States dollars. For the second place prize, we will gift $1,500. And the third place prize, we will gift 750. And we'll probably manage to find a way to ship you these wonderful t-shirts. So Golem, if you want one, then I'm sure we can find a way to get a lot of folks a free t-shirt. All right, well, that's pretty much all I have for you. Are there any questions before folks start hacking? Any questions about requirements? I see there are some questions. Let me just take. Abdullah asks, is it possible to have detailed documentation on worker-to-worker communication in TypeScript? The current page in the documentation seems to only provide an overview of the concept, unlike the more comprehensive information available for Rust. So I think that's in progress. However, I do want to paste a link into Discord now. 1 second. That is going to help you. That's a great question, by the way. And I know we need to improve our documentation there. All right, so I'm going to paste a link into Discord now. This link is an example in TypeScript that should help you get started because it's going to demonstrate this worker-to-worker communication. Unfortunately, that's not part of the release. We didn't have enough time to get this example into the release process, so you're not going to be able to use this as a template in the command line tool, but this should at least provide a starting point. Great question. And then another question is, if I run into errors, for example, Rust panics and so on, how long will you guys be available to quickly help out? And the answer is that we're going to have, because we have one team member, Afsal, in Australia, and we have a couple people in the US and a couple people in Europe. We have a fairly broad coverage. So I would say, just ping us on Discord, and there might be a few gaps in the schedule of like, an hour or two here or there where no one is around because of different time zones or prior existing commitments. But we do have pretty good, I think, coverage all around the globe across multiple time zones. So just ping us, and chances are someone will be able to help you out. That said, the WebAssembly ecosystem is fairly new. The back end, the sort of WebAssembly component model, all the stuff that we're using is fairly new. It's expected that there's going to be a little pain in some of this, and some of the issues you run into may not be related to Golem per se. They might just be related to sort of the newness of WebAssembly and its component model. So Googling can sometimes be your friend, especially if the error you're encountering is somehow related to your own code running and not related to Golem. Then it could be a WebAssembly thing. It could be a tooling issue or something like that. So definitely Google is your friend, and someone should be around pretty much at all times. And then Dorinda asks, is there any support of the Scala language? And the answer is there's no official support for the Scala language. However, there is a project, I think it's hosted on the Golem Cloud organization, Scala Golem or something like that, that does have something working. And how it does that is it uses Scala.js. So that project definitely needs more work, I think. And also, WebAssembly, the component model, has only recently brought on good enough support for JavaScript and TypeScript that you can actually build something. However, I should say JavaScript and TypeScript are still experimental languages on Golem. And that's because not all of the pieces are there over in the WebAssembly world. There's various projects that are designed to bring the full power of the component model to JavaScript and TypeScript programs, and they're lacking the occasional feature or might have a rough edge or bug in different places. And so that's why we're still considering JavaScript and TypeScript experimental, and why if you pick JavaScript or TypeScript, you're going to probably you'll run into a few issues. That's no problem. You'll probably be able to work around them, but you'll definitely run into a few issues there. Rust is really solid, I think, at this point, and C++ solid. Go is in a reasonable state. Python seems pretty good, but the JavaScript, TypeScript stuff is a little less solid at this point. And then we have some stuff on top of that over in the Scala world that manages to use Scala.js to build a component that can be deployed on Golem. And I will say you're welcome to choose Scala if you like. You're probably going to need that project in order to make serious progress. And there is some chance that if you choose Scala, you might just end up like implementing stuff that's not there, right? Or adding support for it. And there might be a little bit of pain that's specific to the fact that we don't officially support Scala. But that said, I have seen the Hello World. It worked fine. I don't know what the limitations are, but I know that Scala project, Scala on Golem project, is behind where state-of-the-art support for TypeScript and JavaScript is. So it's not yet been updated to that. It is a little bit behind. And then Nicolay says, for other Scala enthusiasts, I tried using the Scala.js plugin, and yeah, okay, fantastic. So we got a link. Oh, he actually created a guide, Golem Scala Quick Start. That's fantastic. Thank you, Nicolay. And then Abdullah asks, could we have some general guidelines regarding the demo so we can prepare accordingly? Yeah, sure, no problem. Let me pull that up. So again, we'll talk about demo guidelines more tomorrow and answer any questions. But if you're just wondering roughly what you need to do, your demo needs to showcase the capability of your backend. And that means you need to be like using curl or Postman or something like that, or it could be using any other tool that you like. You need to show in the demo, invoking this REST API to perform the different functions that are required of your REST API. And that just shows that it works. And not only does it show that it worked, but it also shows what sort of design you chose for the API. And this is a great way to involve everyone else, the outside world. Obviously, we're going to take a look at your code as well, but that's hard to demo, doesn't demo as well. So that live demo of you invoking your own API is mostly for everyone's just visual benefit. And then you need to discuss when you're demoing this any limitations of your implementation. So that means if you ended up not being able to make it scalable in the number of users, or you ended up not being able to do worker-to-worker communication, or you have some other sort of limitation, especially if it doesn't satisfy the technical requirements. But even if it does, I think it would be nice to include that in there. Just basically a disclaimer on all the things that you expect to not work. Because if you're expecting everything to work and we go in and look at the code and say, oh, well, this is never going to work, then there's going to be a little bit of a discrepancy there, and it's going to cost you in the judging process. Then also we want you to talk through. You don't need to prepare slides or anything, but you should at least talk through and say a few words about what architecture you ended up choosing. And what that would look like is like, hey, I have these components, and these components, I use them in these different ways. And I have one worker for this, and I have one worker for this, and one worker for that, and so forth. And just sort of walking people through that so they can get the big picture in their mind. Obviously, you could create an architectural diagram if you wanted, but you certainly don't need to. Just a few sentences on the architecture that you've chosen and how well that's going to scale in number of users will be very useful. And then your your demo, you could do that through the REST API. If you don't have a REST API, then you could do that through Golem CLI or the Golem Cloud Console. Or if you built a front end, if you ended up building like a one-page front end, you should definitely include that in the demo because people want to see what that looks like and how it works with your REST API. All right, great questions. Question, can I use Nats? Well, Golem is open source. There's nothing to stop you, but that's a lot of work because Golem does not have built-in support for Nats. So it's going to be difficult for you to use Nats and also use Golem in the time that you have because you would have to add Nats support for Golem's worker-to-worker communication, and that's a big project. That would be a fun project, but that's more time, a lot more time than 32 hours. All right, any other questions? All right, well, fantastic, everyone. I wish everyone the best of luck, and I will see you online. Have fun. Don't work too